Please pray with me. Gracious God, may the meditations of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be a pleasing offering to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, we've all had this experience. We're driving on the freeway, and there's a closed lane up ahead. Now, most people, well in advance, will move to the lane that is not going to be closed. But we have a few people that, for whatever reason, insist on staying in that lane and zooming on ahead of everybody else. And I know some of you fall into that category. But then when the lane does actually end, oops, those cars have to get into the lane with all the other traffic. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm nice and I'll let a car in. After all, I know that sometimes we end up in that lane by mistake. We didn't realize the lane was closing ahead. Maybe we turned onto the road, or maybe we weren't paying enough attention. Or also, people know oftentimes who drive which lane is closed. So sometimes they're in the right lane even before the signs show. Because, oh, that lane's coming up. So I always try to be nice sometimes. But other times, I'm not so generous. And I stick really close to the car in front of me, making sure not to let those folks in. But then every so often there's the guy in the other lane, and he's kind of scary. He's driving an old beat-up vehicle that you can see has been in several accidents, or he just looks scary, and he just moves in like he's going to hit you. So out of sheer self-preservation, you let the guy in. And all those folks behind you have waited patiently for their turn, and now they've got to wait even longer. So how often do selfish jerks cut into the line and make others wait? How often do we do that? Our first reading is from the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah ministered in the kingdom of Judah in the years leading up to Babylon's destruction of Jerusalem in 587 BCE. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, Jeremiah was persecuted for his challenging message. His message was that the nation needed to surrender to Babylon or it would be destroyed. As you can imagine, that was not a popular message. Our text for today, however, reads somewhat differently than that. In fact, chapters 30 and 31 of Jeremiah are referred to by scholars as the book of consolation, since the message is much more hopeful, much more comforting. Here God promises to take the remnant of the northern kingdom. Ephraim was the dominant tribe of the northern kingdom, so whenever you see Ephraim mentioned, it's talking about the northern kingdom, and to restore them. Now, the northern kingdom had been destroyed 100 years before by Assyria, but now a remnant will return from the land of the north and the farthest parts of the earth. And this is happening because God has chosen out of sheer goodness to restore them. Because God is a generous God who provides blessings for all. Our epistolary reading continues through Hebrews. We continue talking about Jesus Christ's priesthood. Last week, the author brought up how the priesthood of the Jerusalem temple indicated that Christ's priesthood was superior to that priesthood. And here in this section, he gives the reasons why. First of all, this is a permanent priesthood that will never end because Jesus Christ now lives forever. Another reason that it's a better priesthood is because Jesus Christ is morally perfect, unlike other priests who can fall into sin. Now, we need to be careful with this text, however, because often Christians have used this to claim that Christianity has superseded Judaism. By that, we mean that God has rejected Jews as God's people and replaced them with Christians. This replacement is called supersessionism, and as you can imagine, it is a dangerous theology. But scholars have since revised their understanding of the book of Hebrews. Instead of Christianity replacing Judaism, instead seeing Jesus' priesthood as an end times reality. So it's something that is coming in the future, when all things are made new. It is not actually a present reality here and now. So then we can understand it isn't like Christ's priesthood has somehow replaced Judaism. Instead, Christ's priesthood is something that comes into effect in the future, in the end of time. After all, the early church was very much oriented to the end times. But here we see that God has provided a means of salvation for the people. Now, our reading from Mark 10 continues Jesus' journey to Jerusalem. In fact, in Mark, the very next scene after this text is Mark's version of Jesus' triumphal entry, which normally we read on Palm Sunday, which we won't in fact be discussing until that time. So this healing story is placed right before Jesus enters Jerusalem. It also happens to be Jesus' last miracle in the book of Mark. The one healed, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, is actually named, which is unusual. Usually the people that Jesus healed are not given the name. Although as I was thinking about this, I realized that Bartimaeus means son of Timaeus. So it's not exactly the greatest name. But there are some other unusual features here. First of all, Jesus heals the man, but he doesn't command him to keep it secret like he usually does. Not only that, Bartimaeus actually becomes a follower of Jesus at this point. Bartimaeus does something that the rich guy from a couple weeks ago couldn't do. He throws off his only possession, his cloak, and follows Jesus. But at the same time, this healing story has all those two familiar features. He literally has to yell over and over to get the healing that he needs, and people keep trying to shush him. But his persistence paid off, and he was healed. His sight was restored. The truth of Jesus is seen by the blind man, while those with sight can't really see. In Mark, Jesus only says, "Your faith has made you well," to one other person, and that's the woman who was hemorrhaging blood. Like with Bartimaeus, people will often shush those in need, trying to keep them from making a scene, or to go back to my earlier metaphor, will drive in front of them and make them wait for them, or push other people out of the line so that they can be first. And that's one of those ways that we can get in the way of getting in the way of blessings that God intends for others. Our world has nearly 8 billion people in it. As I was looking over some statistics from the University of Michigan, I noticed that the United States constitutes 5% of the world's population, but consumes 16% of the world's energy. Also, the world produces more than enough food for every man, woman, and child on this planet. And yet 10 million people die each year from hunger-related causes. Here in the United States, we waste 30 to 40% of our food. Now, international development is a very complex issue. I'm not going to try to simplify this. But the point I'm trying to make here is that God has provided enough for all people. There's enough. Yet God's blessings are not getting to all of God's children. There are things, there are people that are getting in the way, pushing themselves to the front, preventing others from getting access to what they need. Again, there are lots of reasons for that. But one important reason for us to keep in mind is that often those at the top, and you and I are at the top when it comes to the world's population, we often do cut in front of others. Often the people at the top use more than they need. Or when they have more than they need, sometimes they end up hoarding it or just throwing it away. We need to be better. We need to be good neighbors to others. We need to get out of the way so that the blessings can flow to all of God's children. God is at work in the world, bringing blessings to everybody. We need to have faith, but we also need to get out of the way for others to receive those blessings. Now, my sister-in-law would be upset with me if I didn't mention that when you are coming upon a closing lane, to be the most efficient users of the lane, and traffic engineers will back you up on this, you actually should be using both lanes until they're closing. And then when they close, you should what's called zipper merge together. So even though I like to be judgmental against those people zooming by me, they actually are more efficiently using the roadway. Because when you think about it, gosh, all these people are lined up for 5 miles before the lane closes. But that lane is just sitting there empty. Well, if we learned how to zipper merge, we wouldn't have to do that. But that actually has nothing to do with my point. I just wanted to make sure like I said, my sister-in-law would be so angry, she'd be like, Chris, you know that that's a more efficient use of the lane. Yes, I know, but your own husband, my brother, doesn't agree with you. You know that too. But I digress. Just want to zipper merge. But the point for us today is getting out of the way so that others can receive God's blessing. And we do that through a variety of ways. One important way is to educate ourselves, learn about the world, learn about what's going on. Unfortunately, it's easy to just kind of live in a little island and not know what's going on. But at the same time, we live in an age when it is so easy to get information. Heck, you can go on the computer and it's like, it's right there, right? And quality of the information might be a little iffy, but there is all sorts of information out there. Yesterday when I was getting my hair cut, I accidentally said at the St. John people getting my hair done, and then I had to correct myself. Getting it cut. But the gal that was cutting my hair mentioned that, she just loved Aldi's and how, when you go in, you have to put a quarter in there to get the carts. That way people always bring their carts back. And I said, well, they all the grocery stores do that in Europe. And she's like, they do? And I was like, yeah. But she'd never been to Europe, and she didn't know that. But, this is all these little things that can be done that they're doing in other parts of the world that we don't even think about. So educate ourselves. My host mother, she didn't own a dryer. She line dried everything. And in fact, when I was teaching English in Lithuania, I didn't have a dryer either. I had to line dry everything. Now, I didn't do it. My host mother did. She, of course, dutifully ironed everything after line drying it, including my underwear, which was very embarrassing, I might add. But I guess if you ever tried to wear underwear after it's been line dried, you'd probably appreciate it being ironed, because it's kind of stiff. But, there's things we can do to learn about what the rest of the world does. And the second thing we can do, so educate ourselves, the second thing we can do is consume less. Just be more efficient with what we use. We buy extra food that we then have to throw away. We buy, an extra can opener because we forgot we already had one. I mean, so I've heard. I'm not one of those people that's ever done that, but I've heard other people do that. I keep all my stuff out on the countertop so I never forget what I have. But some people that put stuff away may forget that they have it. But so we can consume less. The other thing that we can do is, of course, we can give more. Share more of our resources with those in need, either through organizations or to friends and family. Fly. Anyway, why are you bothering me, Fly? Come on. So we can give more. And the other thing that we can do is we can advocate for the needy. There are organizations that we can work through, like Bread for the World, that is looking at how to really improve the situation for the world's people. So educate ourselves, consume less, give more, advocate. Those are 4 things that we can pretty easily do. Because we don't want to be like the people in the story who are shushing Bartimaeus. Oh, be quiet. Don't make us fuss. We want people to be able to get what they need. We don't want to get in the way. We want to get out of the way so that others can receive the blessings that they need to from God. And that's what I want us to be thinking about this week.